Hey guys, tonight we walk into a place where the wind tastes like salt, the pine trees lean like they know something, and an entire English colony seems to have stepped off the edge of the map. Opportunity. You stand on Roanoke Island in the late 16th century, with marsh grass whispering around your knees, mosquitoes forming an unpaid welcoming committee, and the Atlantic breathing just beyond the dunes. Somewhere near here, families build houses, light fires, argue over supplies, and try very hard to pretend that this is all going wonderfully. Reality check: you probably won't survive this, especially if your survival plan depends on wooden ships, opportunity, confused investors, and whatever England packed after lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from, opportunity, and what time it is there, because someone hearing this at 2:30 am in a dark room deserves historical companionship. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Do you feel the island first through your feet? The ground is not solid in the grand, reassuring way a stone castle floor is solid. It has a soft give to it, a damp patience, as if the whole place is deciding whether to hold you or swallow your boots. Opportunity. Sand mixes with leaf mold. Brackish water glints between reeds. The air smells of cedar, smoke, oyster shells, and weather coming from somewhere you cannot see yet. Opportunity. If England imagined America as a clean sheet of paper waiting politely for instructions, Roanoke is already proving to be a very damp sheet of paper, covered in invisible notes written by people who were here first. Opportunity. You trudge beneath tall pines and live oaks, where the branches scratch softly against each other overhead. The island is part of the Outer Banks region, a chain of barrier islands along the coast of present-day North Carolina. Opportunity. And that mainstream fact matters because barrier islands are beautiful in the same way a candle flame is beautiful during a power outage. Lovely, useful, and absolutely not stable. Storms reshape them. Inlets open and close. Opportunity. Sandbars shift like they are bored. The sea does not ask permission before editing the coastline. England, unfortunately, has arrived with a quill pen and a lot of confidence. Ahead, the settlement begins to appear in pieces. Opportunity. Not the grand lost city people sometimes imagine. No marble columns glowing under moonlight, no dramatic violins hiding in the shrubbery. You see rough houses, timber frames, thatched or boarded roofs, a defensive enclosure, storage pits, tools, opportunity, baskets, and the tired human evidence of people trying to make a home before the weather, hunger, or politics notices them. Smoke curls from fires, someone coughs, someone complains about the damp, someone almost certainly, opportunity, says the 16th century equivalent of, "This was not in the brochure." The story already has weight before the famous disappearance ever happens. England has been watching Spain grow rich from American empire, opportunity, and English leaders do not enjoy being left out of a profitable disaster. Sir Walter Raleigh holds the royal permission to attempt colonization in this region, though. At this moment, he is far away from your muddy shoes and mosquito-bitten wrists. Opportunity. You are standing inside the dream he helped sell, a foothold in the New World, a base for trade, privateering, prestige, and maybe one day a permanent English presence. Very practical, obviously, if you ignore food, weather, diplomacy, distance, opportunity, and the fact that everyone involved keeps underestimating the Atlantic like it is merely a large puddle with attitude. You listen as the island hums around you, insects vibrate in the brush. Birds call from the marsh. The sound of chopping wood carries through the trees, each strike briefly convincing you that order is being created here. But the forest does not feel conquered, it feels observant. Beyond the English houses are native villages, fields, opportunity, fishing grounds, travel routes, sacred places, rivalries, alliances, griefs, and knowledge systems older than any English plan scratched on a parchment. Opportunity. The Roanoke people and neighboring Algonquian-speaking communities understand this coast in ways the newcomers cannot yet imagine. They know where food comes from when ships do not arrive. They know which waters turn dangerous. Opportunity. They know that a hungry stranger with metal tools and bad manners can become a problem very quickly. And already you sense the first great mistake. The English look at the landscape and see opportunity, but not enough instruction. Opportunity. They see trees for timber, rivers for routes, harbors for ships, and people as possible allies, converts, servants, threats, or obstacles depending on the mood of the day. It is a very English menu of categories, opportunity, and not one of them includes, maybe listen carefully for a long time before making enormous decisions. Historians still argue whether Roanoke was doomed mostly by poor planning, damaged diplomacy, environmental hardship, bad timing, opportunity, or the simple arrogance of trying to plant a colony before understanding the soil beneath it. You move closer to the shore. The wind lifts your hair and presses cool against your face. Across the water, the mainland lies low and green, opportunity broken by creeks and sounds. The ocean is near, but it is not a highway in the comforting modern sense. It is the colony's only link to England and also the giant wet reason nobody can rely on England. Ships may bring flour, tools, letters, opportunity, reinforcements, and hope. Ships may also vanish, turn back, arrive late, or bring exactly the wrong people with exactly the wrong priorities. Opportunity. A colony depending on regular resupply in the 1580s is basically a group project where the most important member lives 3,000 miles away and has maybe pirates on the commute. Still, there is beauty here, and that is part of the trap. Opportunity. At dusk, the marsh turns bronze. The water reflects strips of lavender and orange. Smoke hangs low between the trees. You hear waves beyond the dunes, steady and sleepy, as if the sea is trying to lull everyone into ignoring the danger. Opportunity. Even the insects seem less aggressive for a moment, though this is probably just a trick. Mosquitoes, like empires, are never truly off duty. A quirky little tidbit floats into the evening with the smoke. Tunity, some early European descriptions of the region made it sound almost impossibly abundant, a place of grapes, tall trees, rich soils, and generous landscapes. Tunity, promotional writing could turn hardship into paradise with the confidence of a real estate agent describing a swamp as waterfront potential. That rosy language helped feed the dream, but dreams do not boil corn, repair boats, tunity, or explain local politics. The island gives, yes, but it gives according to its own seasons and rules. It does not care what Raleigh promised. You stand there as darkness gathers. The settlement becomes shapes, then silhouettes. Tunity, firelight flickers across tired faces. Somewhere a child leans against a parent. Somewhere a guard watches the trees. Somewhere people speak of tomorrow as if tomorrow is a thing they can schedule. Tunity, you already know the name Roanoke will one day become a question whispered through classrooms, documentaries, campfire stories, and late-night internet rabbit holes. But for now, nobody has vanished. Not yet, they are simply here. Tunity breathing salt air, making plans, misunderstanding more than they know, while the island listens with its patient green silence. The night does not fully settle before your mind drifts east, back across the Atlantic toward the warm rooms where this gamble is imagined by men with clean collars and very little mud on their boots. Roanoke, from where you stand, Tunity, smells like smoke, wet bark, and nervous labor. England, from where Raleigh sits, smells more like wax seals, court perfume, and opportunity wearing expensive shoes. That gap matters. Tunity, empires are often born in rooms where nobody has to carry the barrel. You follow Sir Walter Raleigh in imagination, not as a muddy colonist, but as a courtier moving through the bright machinery of Elizabethan ambition. In 1584, Tunity, Queen Elizabeth grants him a charter to explore, settle, and claim lands in North America not already held by Christian rulers. That is the mainstream historical fact. Beneath the dream, Roanoke begins not as a village, but as permission written in royal language, a legal spell cast from across the sea. The charter promises territory, prestige, and a chance to challenge Spain's American empire. It does not, very noticeably, Tunity, include a button labeled "Solve Hunger." Raleigh is charming, bold, politically gifted, and very good at standing near power without looking like he is standing too near power. He belongs to that glittering Elizabethan world where poetry, Tunity privateering, colonization, and personal branding overlap in a way that feels suspiciously modern. If he had lived now, he would absolutely have a dramatic profile picture, a podcast about leadership, Tunity, and a course called Conquer Your Destiny in 12 Easy Lessons. Thankfully for everyone's inbox, he has ships instead. You feel the plan taking shape like fog over the Thames. England wants a base across the ocean, somewhere useful for trade, Tunity, settlement, and raiding Spanish treasure routes. Spain, fattened by silver and conquest, is the intimidating neighbor with a bigger house, a louder horse, and a habit of telling everyone else to stay off the lawn. Tunity. Raleigh's venture offers Elizabeth a way to poke Spain without quite declaring that she is poking Spain. A colony could become a harbor, a listening post, a supply station, a Protestant counterweight. Tunity, maybe even the beginning of an English America. It is a large dream, and large dreams are famous for stepping over small practical objects such as nails, seeds, and breakfast. You watch maps spread across tables. They are beautiful, Tunity dangerous things filled with coastlines that look cleaner than reality. On paper, the Atlantic has edges. On paper, rivers bend politely. On paper, a colony sits where someone points. But paper does not show a shoal appearing under a ship, Tunity, or spoiled grain, or the awkward silence after a diplomatic gift lands badly. Distance turns risk into decoration. Roanoke is far enough away that men can speak of it grandly. The farther the island is from the court, the easier it becomes to imagine that courage will substitute for logistics. And then there is the name Virginia. The English apply it to the broader region in honor of Elizabeth, the so-called Virgin Queen. Tunity, wrapping geography and flattery so thick you could spread it on toast. This naming choice is both political and promotional, a royal compliment tied to imperial appetite. A quirky tidbit, because history enjoys being extra. Tunity is that Raleigh becomes famous for places he never actually visits. He sponsors and directs the colonial effort. But he does not personally stride around Roanoke swatting mosquitoes and asking where the nearest decent tavern is. He remains distant, Tunity, which is comfortable for ambition and terrible for understanding. You move through the imagined docks where sailors load supplies and investors load expectations. Ships creak against the wharf, barrels thump. Rope rasps through rough hands. Tunity, the smell is tar, fish, damp wool, and optimism beginning to sour in advance. Men prepare to cross an ocean that can stretch a delay into a death sentence. The vessels are not floating hotels. They are cramped wooden arguments with sails. Tunity, privacy is minimal, food preservation is a gamble, and seasickness is basically the Atlantic's welcome handshake. Yet the propaganda glows. Early reports from the region describe fertile lands, friendly possibilities, and natural abundance. Tunity, some of that is real. The Carolina coast is not empty, not barren, not worthless. It is rich with ecosystems and human communities. But promotional accounts tend to polish complexity until it shines like certainty. To persuade backers and rulers, you do not lead with "everyone may starve if timing, weather, diplomacy, and resupply fail simultaneously." Bad brochure, weak font choice, Tunity. Historians still argue whether Raleigh's plan was fundamentally realistic for its time or whether it was built on wishful thinking from the beginning. Some point out that every colonial project starts with uncertainty. Tunity in England was learning in a dangerous world already dominated by Iberian powers. Others emphasize thin supplies, shifting goals, weak leadership continuity, and limited understanding of native politics. Tunity. You stand between those views and feel the uncomfortable truth a plan can be bold and foolish at the same time. Humans are talented like that. The Queen's support is powerful, but not bottomless. Rally has rights in favor. Tunity, yet financing remains complicated. Colonies cost money before they produce anything, which is exactly the kind of business model that makes investors suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Ships must be hired, crews paid, tools gathered, Tunity food packed, specialists recruited, soldiers or settlers persuaded. Every item has weight, every delay has consequence. A missing crate in London can become a hungry week on Roanoke. Tunity. A careless assumption in court can become a funeral beside a marsh. Remember those mosquitoes from the island. They are not even the worst accountants in this story. You imagine Raleigh looking westward through reports and rumor. Tunity, he sees a strategic foothold, he sees privateering potential, he sees fame. Maybe sees a Protestant English future planted beyond Spain's reach. But the people who will live inside that future need fishhooks, axes, corn, trust, shelter, Tunity, and good timing. Glory is light to carry in a speech. It becomes heavier when someone has to pack it in barrels. So the ships go out fragile and brave, carrying dreams too polished for the weather waiting ahead. Their sails swell. Their hulls lean into gray water. England recedes behind them, full of court gossip, ambition, and people who will later wonder why the colony did not simply succeed more conveniently. You remain with the motion of the voyage, Tunity, feeling the Atlantic widen under you, while Raleigh's distant gamble drifts toward Roanoke, toward pine smoke, marsh silence, and the first small misreadings that will soon grow teeth. The ocean carries you backward and forward at once, the way old stories do when they are trying to explain how a disaster learned its first few words. Before the families, before the famous carved message, Tunity, before the empty settlement waits in silence, there are earlier footprints pressed into the sand. They look harmless enough at first, a landing here, a greeting there, a gift exchanged, a name misunderstood. History, being dramatic but patient, Tunity does not usually drop the whole roof at once. It starts by loosening small nails while everyone admires the ceiling. You arrive in 1584, Tunity, when Raleigh's first reconnaissance expedition reaches the coast under the command of Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow. That is the mainstream historical fact glowing beneath the dawn. Before Roanoke becomes a colony, it becomes a report, Tunity. The English come scouting, measuring possibility with hungry eyes. They sail through unfamiliar waters, find their way among barrier islands and sounds, and encounter native people whose world is not waiting to be discovered. Thank you very much, Tunity, because it is already fully occupied by people with names, alliances, rivalries, harvests, fishing grounds, and better local directions than any English sailor can offer. You step on ashore with them, and the first feeling is astonishment. The land seems generous. Grapes climb trees, cedar scents the air, water flashes silver under birds. The English look around and see abundance so vivid it almost feels staged, as if nature has hired a decorator. But this beauty is not a promise, Tunity. It is a system. It feeds those who understand its cycles, and it quietly embarrasses those who assume a pretty coastline automatically comes with room service. The new world does not have a front desk. Tunity, nobody is coming to ask whether your pillow is firm enough. The first meetings are careful, curious, and loaded with meaning neither side can fully translate. The English meet local Algonquian-speaking people, Tunity including figures later recorded as Manteo and Wanchis who travel back to England after this early contact. Imagine that for a moment, two native men crossing the Atlantic into the cold, noisy heart of Elizabethan England. Tunity, where buildings lean close, clothes look uncomfortable, and everyone probably smells like damp wool and ambition. This quirky tidbit matters because Manteo and Wanchis become living bridges between worlds, though bridges can carry friendship, confusion, and bad news in both directions. You watch gestures become policy too quickly. A cup offered, a meal shared, a trade made. The English are eager to interpret hospitality as invitation, diplomacy as submission, curiosity as consent. Tunity, this is one of the oldest colonial magic tricks, mistaking politeness for permission. Native leaders, meanwhile, have their own reasons to engage. Foreign metal goods are useful. Alliances may strengthen local positions. Tunity, strange visitors can be studied, managed, perhaps turned to advantage. Nobody in this scene is simple. Nobody is just standing around waiting to become a supporting character in an English adventure. Even the trees seem to know that, Tunity, and they have not said a word all day. The reports that return to England are glowing. Barlow describes the region in inviting terms, full of fertile promise and gentle possibility. You can almost hear investors relaxing. Excellent, they think, to a paradise with timber. Very convenient. But promotional language trims the thorns off reality. It does not linger on fragile diplomacy, unfamiliar agriculture, stormy coastlines, Tunity, or the fact that native communities may have completely different ideas about what English presence should mean. The report becomes a doorway, and once enough powerful people want to walk through a doorway, Tunity, they rarely pause to check whether there is a floor on the other side. Then you move into 1585 when a larger English expedition arrives under Sir Richard Grenville, Tunity, bringing Ralph Lane and men who will attempt to establish a military-style outpost. The mood shifts, scouting becomes occupation, curiosity puts on boots. The English build, survey, demand, trade, worry, and judge. Tunity, they are not all villains twirling mustaches in the marsh. Many are frightened, ambitious, hungry, obedient, or simply trapped inside the assumptions of their age. but assumptions can still injure people. Tunity, a sword does not become soft because the person holding it had a difficult morning. You feel one of the first serious cracks open around a silver cup. According to English accounts, a cup goes missing during the expedition's movements. Tunity and Grenville's men respond by burning an indigenous village and destroying corn. It is a brutal overreaction and it poisons trust early. One lost cup, one violent punishment, and suddenly the air changes. If there is a lesson here, it is that colonial diplomacy should not be run by people with the emotional regulation of a kicked wasp nest. Also, perhaps label your cups, but mostly the first lesson. Historians still argue whether these early English accounts exaggerate, tunity, simplify, or misunderstand native intentions and events because most surviving written records come from English perspectives. You stand inside that problem like fog. The native voices are present in action, movement, resistance, alliance, survival, but they are often filtered through English pens. So you have to listen around the documents, not just to them. You listen to what is said, what is omitted, what sounds too convenient, and what silence may be trying to protect. Tunity, Manteo and Wanchese become symbols of the widening split. Manteo remains more closely associated with cooperation with the English, while Wanchese appears to grow wary, even hostile. Tunity. After seeing England and understanding more clearly what these visitors might bring, it is tempting to make them opposites, the friendly guide and the suspicious critic, as if history were casting a simple play. But real people are not chess pieces carved for colonial convenience. Wanchese's caution may be wisdom, Manteo's cooperation may be strategy, loyalty, hope, pressure, or all of those at once. Human motives are messy. That is why historians have jobs and why dinner conversations become unsafe after someone says, actually it's more complicated. By now, the pattern is forming. The English admire the land but misunderstand its politics. Tunity, they rely on native food but damage native trust. They imagine permanent settlement but behave like temporary soldiers. They need help and act superior while needing it, which is an impressive athletic maneuver if arrogance counts as gymnastics. The island has not vanished anyone yet, it is only collecting consequences. Evening falls again, you stand near the edge of the water and watch tracks fade where waves reach the sand. The first expeditions leave marks, Tunity, but not all marks stay visible. Some become rumors in London, some become anger in villages, some become decisions made months later by people who remember insult more clearly than ceremony. Tunity, the colony that will one day disappear, is not born in a single mysterious moment. It is assembled slowly from bright reports, bad assumptions, damaged trust, and the soft Tunity. Dangerous belief that a place becomes yours because you have found words for wanting it. By the time you settle into Ralph Lane's Roanoke, the air has lost the fresh sparkle of first contact and taken on the smell of damp socks, wood smoke, and men pretending they are not worried. The earlier wonder is still here if you squint, the bronze marsh at sunset, the soft pine shadows, the glitter of fish moving under shallow water. But now there is also hunger behind the eyes. Hunger changes a place. It makes every bird sound like dinner, every storage basket look too small. Tunity, and every conversation with neighbors carry the quiet awkwardness of someone asking to borrow flour for the 6th time. Ralph Lane's colony, established in 1585, is not yet the famous Lost Colony of Families and Children. Tunity, that is the mainstream historical fact you carry with you here. Lane's settlement is a mostly military outpost made up of soldiers and men rather than the civilian colonists who arrive later under John White. It is meant to explore, hold territory, gather intelligence, and perhaps become a useful English base. In theory, this sounds firm and strategic. In practice, it is a group of armed Englishmen on a barrier island with limited supplies, uncertain local alliances, Tunity, and a truly Olympic talent for making everyone nearby nervous. You walk along the rough fortifications and feel how thin the whole project is. Timber walls stand against the trees, but the trees are not impressed. Men repair shelters, Tunity, sharpen tools, check weapons, and scan the water for ships that are not there. The outpost has the mood of a camping trip that became a government policy. Somewhere, someone is probably insisting morale is excellent, which is how you know morale has packed a bag and left quietly before breakfast. Lane is energetic, ambitious, and curious about the land beyond the island. He sends expeditions inland, asks questions about rivers, mines, towns, and routes, Tunity, and dreams of finding wealth or strategic advantage. The English are especially interested in rumors of copper, pearls, and passages that might lead deeper into the continent. A quirky tidbit, hovering at the edge of the map like a candle in fog, Tunity, is that some English hopes lean toward the possibility of finding a route to the Pacific or rich inland kingdoms. Because apparently one dangerous swampy uncertainty was not enough, they wanted bonus levels. You follow them into the sounds and rivers where water spreads into silver sheets and the shorelines fold into reeds. Canoes move with a quiet skill the English boats cannot match. Native guides and informants become essential, Tunity. Though the English often misunderstand what they are hearing, a name becomes a promise, a rumor becomes a plan, a cautious answer becomes evidence of hidden treasure. Translation is not just words, it is worldview, politics, humor, fear, Tunity, and timing. Remove those and you are basically trying to assemble a ship using only the decorative carving from the bow. Food becomes the colony's central problem. The English depend heavily on native communities for corn and other supplies, Tunity, but those communities are not endless storage rooms with friendly customer service. They have their own harvest, obligations, enemies, and survival calculations. When the English ask, trade, pressure, or demand, each action lands inside a network of local politics. The outpost consumes more than it produces. It needs help while also behaving like help is owed. This is not a charming personality trait in a neighbor. Opportunity, especially when the neighbor has weapons and bad table manners. You feel the tension thicken around relations with Wingina, also known in some English accounts as Pemisipan, a leader among the Roanoke people. Early diplomacy gives way to suspicion. Opportunity, the English worry that native groups are withholding food or plotting against them. Native leaders likely worry that the English are dangerous, needy, and impossible to satisfy, which is rude but also not inaccurate. Opportunity, the relationship becomes a slow burning fuse, and every shortage adds another spark. Historians still argue whether Lane's men faced a genuine coordinated threat or whether English fear, hunger, opportunity, and misunderstanding inflated local resistance into a conspiracy. The surviving evidence leans heavily through English voices, and those voices often describe native strategy only when it threatens English plans. Opportunity, you stand in that uncertainty and hear both possibilities breathing. Native leaders may indeed have tried to contain or remove a dangerous outpost. The English may also have interpreted ordinary caution in defensive politics as treachery. Opportunity, more likely, because history enjoys making clean answers unavailable. Both fear and strategy fed each other until violence felt inevitable. The days grow harder, supplies run low, men grumble. Exploration brings knowledge, but not enough food. Opportunity, the colony's military mindset makes it better at suspicion than adaptation. A farming settlement might have moved differently, listened differently, planned around seasons differently. Lane's outpost watches, patrols, questions, and prepares. Opportunity, it is easier to build a fort than trust. Forts have straight lines. Trust requires emotional paperwork, and nobody packed enough of that. Then violence breaks through. In 1586, Lane orders an attack that results in the death of Pemisipan. The details come through English accounts, tangled with claims of plots and self-defense, but the outcome is clear enough: trust is shattered. Once a leader is killed, diplomacy does not simply resume because someone says, "Right, awkward," moving on. The marsh remembers. The villages remember. The English, trapped in their own fear, have turned dependence into hostility and hostility into danger. It is a very efficient process if the goal is to ruin your own survival chances. Opportunity. And then, as if the story has been waiting for a dramatic stage cue, Sir Francis Drake appears off the coast after raiding Spanish holdings in the Caribbean. His arrival in 1586 is both miraculous and inconvenient. Opportunity, which is a very Roanoke combination. Drake offers aid and possibly transport. A storm batters the fleet. Supplies and boats are lost. Lane's exhausted men choose to leave with Drake and return to England. After all the fort building, exploring, worrying, and offending people within canoe distance, the colony is abandoned. The outpost does not vanish mysteriously. It quits loudly, soaking wet and probably smelling terrible. Not long afterward, Opportunity, a resupply ship, arrives and finds the site empty, because timing in this story has the comic cruelty of someone stepping on a rake in slow motion. Then Grenville later leaves a small group of men to hold the place. Opportunity, a decision that feels less like strategy and more like leaving a sticky note on a hurricane: "Please maintain English presence." Those men will matter later, mostly because when the next colonists arrive, Opportunity, they will find signs that the little garrison did not enjoy a peaceful retirement. You stand in the emptying fort as Lane's men depart, and the island exhales around you. The pines remain. The insects continue their tiny mechanical song. Opportunity. Smoke thins into the damp air. What has been learned? The English now know more about the coast, the sounds, the villages, and the difficulty of survival. But they have also taught local communities something important. Opportunity. These newcomers can be hungry, violent, demanding, and unreliable. That lesson will be waiting when John White's families come ashore, carrying hope into a place already bruised by memory. You come back with softer luggage this time, though the sea does not become softer just because there are women, children, and household hopes aboard. The Atlantic still heaves under the ships like some enormous sleeping animal with trust issues. Opportunity, the timbers still creak. The air below deck still carries that intimate perfume of salt, sweat, old food, damp wool, and people silently regretting decisions made on land. But something has changed. This is not Lane's hard little military outpost returning with its clenched jaw and suspicious eyes. This voyage carries families. In 1587, John White leads a new group of colonists across the ocean. Opportunity, and that is the mainstream historical fact at the heart of this turning point. Around 115 English settlers, including men, women, and children, are sent to establish a more permanent civilian colony in the region of Chesapeake Bay. Opportunity, though they end up at Roanoke. The difference matters. These people are not merely scouting or raiding or holding a fort until the next ship comes. They intend to live, plant, build, marry, baptize, bury, Opportunity, and make ordinary days in a place that has so far been very resistant to ordinary English expectations. You stand among them as the coast appears, low and green beyond the water. Faces lift. Someone grips the rail. Someone whispers a prayer. Opportunity. Someone, because humans are consistent across centuries, probably asks whether they are almost there every 10 minutes until everyone considers throwing him gently into the sea. There are craftsmen here, laborers, assistants, Opportunity, and families carrying not only tools but domestic imagination, kettles, Bedding, clothing, seeds, maybe small keepsakes from home, the emotional clutter of people who believe they are stepping into hardship, yes, but also into future. Toonie John White is not Ralph Lane. He is an artist, a governor, a man who has seen this coast before and drawn its people, plants, and landscapes with careful attention. Toonie, his watercolors from earlier voyages will become some of the most important visual records of the native peoples and environment of the region. He brings a different kind of eye, though an artist's eye does not automatically solve food supply, Toonie diplomacy, or the small matter of being dumped in the wrong place by irritated mariners. A sketchbook is useful. A sketchbook cannot be eaten. Do not test this at home. The plan, at least the plan as England understands it, Toonie, is to settle farther north in the Chesapeake Bay area. That region is considered more suitable, perhaps more defensible, perhaps more promising. But the ships stop at Roanoke, partly to check on the small garrison Grenville left behind, Toonie. And here the story performs one of its little historical throat clearings, the kind that sounds minor until everyone's future bends around it. The colonists find evidence that those earlier men are gone, likely killed, Toonie with bones reportedly discovered in the fort overgrown or damaged. The island has not forgotten Lane's season, it has been holding the bill. You feel the mood change when the newcomers realize Roanoke is not simply a temporary stop. Their pilot, often identified as Simon Fernandez, refuses to carry them farther north, insisting the passengers disembark. Reasons remain debated: whether privateering priorities, supply concerns, impatience, navigational judgment, Toonie or simple hard-edged shipboard authority. Historians still argue whether Fernandez deliberately abandoned the colonists at Roanoke or whether practical pressures made continuing to Chesapeake unrealistic. Either way, Toonie, the result is the same for the people standing beside you. The future they packed for has been relocated without a customer service desk. So they step ashore. The sand receives them quietly. The pines stand as they stood before. Toonie, the fort remnants and old clearings feel less like welcome than warning. Yet for a brief moment, hope does what hope always does. It starts arranging furniture in a burning house. People unload, they sort supplies, they examine shelters. Toonie, they look for fresh water, usable ground, signs of danger, signs of possibility. The island becomes noisy again with axes, voices, footfalls, and the small domestic sounds of settlement. A pot placed near a fire, cloth shaken out. Toonie, a child crying from exhaustion. A woman laughing too sharply at something not quite funny, because if you do not laugh, the fear gets ideas. Among them is Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, pregnant when she arrives. Toonie, her presence makes the colony feel less like a policy and more like a household. The future is not abstract now. It has swollen ankles, tired eyes, and a baby coming whether the colony is ready or not. On August 18, 1587, Toonie, Eleanor gives birth to Virginia Dare, remembered as the first English child born to colonists in the Americas. The fact becomes famous later, polished into symbol, pageant, legend, and souvenir. But in the moment, you hear only the fragile cry of an infant on a humid island at the edge of English reach. It is easy to romanticize that cry. It is also easy to forget how frightening it must have been. A newborn means tenderness, yes, but also risk. Milk, Toonie, shelter, warmth, safety, clean enough conditions, rest for the mother. None of these are guaranteed. The colony can celebrate, but quietly, because everyone understands that babies do not care about imperial destiny. Babies care about immediate service. They are tiny monarchs with no parliament and very strong opinions at 3 a.m. A quirky or fringe tidbit clings to Virginia Dare like mist over the centuries. Toonie, legends will grow around her wildly beyond the evidence, including tales that she transformed into a white doe, a ghostly animal roaming the Carolina woods. This is not mainstream history, of course. It belongs to folklore, longing, Toonie, and the human habit of giving lost children magical exits when the real world refuses to provide answers. Still, you can understand why the story appears. Toonie, a baby born at the edge of a mystery, becomes too symbolically bright for people to leave alone. History hands folklore a candle, and folklore immediately starts redecorating the room. For now, though, Virginia is not a legend. Toonie, she is a child in someone's arms. Manteo, the native ally who had traveled to England, is also present in this fragile new beginning. Around this time, he is baptized and given the title Lord of Roanoke and Dacemonkapute. Toonie, an English gesture meant to formalize alliance and authority. It sounds grand, almost ceremonial enough to solve something. It does not. Toonie titles can be impressive in England and nearly useless in a tangled coastal world where power depends on kinship, local legitimacy, seasonal survival, and whether people actually accept what the title claims. A fancy title without broad recognition is basically a hat with paperwork. Yet the moment is not empty. The colonists are trying. White is trying. Manteo is trying, perhaps from within pressures no English record can fully preserve. Toonie, the settlement breathes with a delicate optimism. Fires burn at dusk. The island smells of wood smoke and salt again. Children move near the houses. Someone plans repairs. Someone imagines gardens. Someone speaks of Chesapeake as if relocation may still happen later. That is how people endure uncertainty. They make the next hour look organized. But under the ordinary sounds, older tensions wait. Toonie, the death of the previous garrison hangs over the place. Lane's violence hangs beneath diplomacy. Nearby native communities have reasons to distrust English return. The colonists have reasons to fear every shadow. Hope has arrived, yes, Toonie, but it has arrived late, undersupplied, poorly placed, and surrounded by memories that do not soften just because a baby has been born. You stand in the warm evening beside the new settlement, Toonie hearing the thin cry of Virginia Dare fade into the sighing pines, and for one brief breath, Roanoke almost feels like it might become a home. The almost home feeling lasts just long enough to become dangerous. Morning comes soft over Roanoke, pale lights spilling through the pines, dew silvering the marsh grass, smoke lifting from the new English houses in thin blue threads. Tunity. Someone stirs a pot, someone checks a tool edge. Someone adjusts a roof patch and pretends the roof is not simply Rain's future hobby. The colony is trying to behave like a settlement now, not an accident. It has families, a governor, a Newbern, Tunity. A plan that has already been dented but not yet shattered. If everyone moves carefully enough, maybe the island will forgive them. The island does not seem especially interested in forgiveness. Tunity. You walk with the settlers near the edge of the cleared ground, where the old fort area and New Hope's overlap in a way that feels almost rude. Beyond the English space, trails lead through trees toward native towns and fields. Tunity. Crawdon lies to the south on an island associated with Mantio's people, often linked with present-day Hatteras. Dacemonk Peak lies closer across the water on the mainland. Tunity, remembered in English accounts as a town connected to earlier tensions and retaliation. These names are not decorations on a mystery map. They are living communities, political relationships, memories, warnings. Tunity. The English are not entering empty wilderness. They are stepping into a neighborhood where they have already been the loud, unstable renters. The mainstream historical fact now sharpens quickly shortly after the 1587 colonists arrive. Tunity. An Englishman named George Howe is killed while crabbing or gathering food away from the settlement. It is a small scene in physical size, one man near the water, doing an ordinary task in a place where ordinary tasks are never fully ordinary. Tunity. But the effect is enormous. Howe's death tells the colonists what the trees have been quietly saying all along: the past has not passed. Someone remembers Lane's violence. Someone remembers burned corn, dead leaders, armed strangers. Tunity and promises that arrived wrapped in hunger. You stand beside the water and imagine the moment after the news spreads. Voices drop, people look toward the woods. A mother pulls a child closer. Men reach for weapons with the speed of fear. The marsh does not change, birds still lift from the reeds, insects continue their tiny complaint department. But the colony changes, the invisible walls rise higher than the timber ones. Every rustle becomes a message. Every distant canoe becomes a possible threat. If anxiety were a building material, Roanoke would suddenly have a cathedral. John White and the colonists need allies immediately. Tunity, and that is where Manteo becomes both essential and tragically overburdened. He is tied to the English through travel, language, diplomacy, baptism, and title, but also tied to native worlds the English only partially understand. You watch him move between expectations like a man carrying fire in both hands. To the English, he is proof that alliance is possible. To local native communities, his relationship with the newcomers may look useful, suspicious, complicated, tunity, or dangerous depending on who is watching. It is a lot to put on one person, especially before coffee, which sadly has not yet arrived to save colonial diplomacy. Tunity. Manteo's people at Croatoan appear more open to alliance with the English than some neighboring groups. That connection matters deeply. It offers the colonists a thread of safety, a place where communication might still work, where food, warning, or refuge might someday be possible. But a thread is not a rope. Croatoan friendship cannot erase every injury done elsewhere. It cannot make Dacemonk Peak safe. It cannot persuade all regional leaders that the English are harmless. Tunity. Because the English have been working very hard to seem otherwise. Then the colony responds to Howe's killing with a raid meant to strike enemies at Dacemonk Peak. The plan sounds decisive in the way frightened plans often do. Tunity. The English intend to punish or deter those they believe responsible. But the attack goes wrong. They reportedly strike people who may not be the intended targets, killing or harming friendly or neutral native people instead. Tunity. It is another wound added to a body already full of bruises. If Roanoke has a talent, it is turning confusion into policy and policy into fresh confusion. Somewhere common sense quietly applies for transfer. Tunity. Historians still argue whether the English clearly understood who killed George Howe and whether the retaliatory raid was based on reliable information panic or the colony's desperate need to appear strong. That phrase, Tunity, historians still argue whether, becomes almost a lullaby in this story, though not a comforting one. It repeats because the evidence is thin, angled, and often written by people explaining themselves after the damage is done. Tunity. You can feel the records trying to sound orderly. You can also feel the disorder leaking through the edges. Meanwhile, the colony tries to continue its ceremonies. Tunity. Because human beings are strange and touching creatures who will perform rituals at the edge of disaster, as if ritual might hold the roof on. Manteo is baptized and made Lord of Roanoke and Dacemonk Peak. Tunity, an English act meant to honor him and strengthen alliance. Virginia Dare is baptized too, anchoring the newborn into English Christian identity. The colony writes these moments into memory as signs of beginning. Baptism, water, salt air, pine shade. Tunity, anxious witnesses. The whole scene feels tender and brittle at once. A quirky fringe tidbit follows these ceremonies through later centuries. Some storytellers and speculative writers will treat Manteo almost like a secret key to the mystery. Tunity imagining hidden agreements, coded movements, or planned absorption into Croatoan society with far more certainty than the evidence allows. It is not impossible that his relationships later mattered in the colonists' survival, but the dramatic, he knew everything version belongs more to mystery appetite than documentation. History gives us a doorway, folklore installs dramatic lighting in a fog machine. You feel why the colony wants ceremonies to matter. Tunity, baptism says order. A title says structure. A governor says authority. But outside those symbols, food remains uncertain, ships remain absent, alliances remain fragile, and fear keeps sharpening itself. Opportunity. The settlers are trying to look normal enough for history, as if normal is a costume they can put on over panic. Someone bakes or bowls what food they have. Someone repairs a wall. Someone watches the tree line too long. Someone says it will be all right in a voice that makes nobody feel better. Evening folds over the island again. The marsh cools. Fires glow inside the settlement. Across the water, unseen villages settle into their own darkness, their own conversations, their own decisions about these returned English strangers. Crawtone remains a possible bridge. Dace Munkapeak remains a warning. Mentio stands somewhere between worlds, honored by one side, rooted in another, Tunity carrying more symbolic weight than any one human should have to carry. And you remain in the middle of it all, listening as Roanoke keeps breathing, still alive, still hopeful. Tunity, but now unmistakably aware that survival here will require more than courage, ceremony, and pretending the walls are thicker than they are. The colony keeps breathing, but now every breath sounds borrowed. You feel it in the way people look at the water more often than the fields, as if the Atlantic might suddenly remember its manners and deliver certainty in a neat wooden crate. Tunity, the settlement still has fires, voices, tools, prayers, and the fussy little sounds of daily life, but underneath all of it runs the same question: how long can hope stretch before it becomes a rope burn? John White knows the answer cannot be forever. He is governor, father, grandfather, witness, messenger, and unfortunately for his sleep schedule, the one man everyone can reasonably pressure into doing the impossible. The colonists need supplies, they need stronger support. They need the original plan repaired, or at least replaced with something less shaped like a slow emergency. The ships that brought them cannot simply linger as floating pantries. Tunity. The season is moving. The pilots are impatient. The island, with its damp beauty and tense neighbors, is not offering a refund. So the colonists ask White to return to England. Tunity. That is the mainstream historical fact at the center of this lonely turn. In late August 1587, John White leaves Roanoke and sails back across the Atlantic to seek help, supplies, and reinforcements, leaving his daughter Eleanor, Tunity, his son-in-law Ananias Dare, and his newborn granddaughter Virginia behind. You stand with him near the shore, and suddenly history feels less like a mystery and more like a family argument nobody wanted. If he stays, Tunity, the colony may starve or fail without help. If he goes, he abandons the people he loves to an island already sharpening its teeth. The decision is not simple, even though later retellings sometimes flatten it into one dramatic mistake. Tunity. White reportedly resists leaving at first, worried that his departure might look like desertion or damage his reputation. The colonists insist. They need someone credible to plead their case in England. They need rally investors, officials, Tunity, sailors, food, tools, and a second chance delivered quickly. It is the kind of plan that sounds reasonable until you remember the Atlantic is involved. Tunity. And the Atlantic in this story behaves less like a road and more like a moody dragon with scheduling problems. You watch White's eyes move across the settlement. There is the place where fires burn low in the morning. Tunity. There are the half-finished repairs. There are the faces of men trying to look brave in front of their families. Somewhere nearby, Virginia Dare is still impossibly small, a bundle of hunger, sleep, and symbol. Eleanor is here too, not as a legend, Tunity, not as a footnote, but as a daughter watching her father prepare to leave. The human weight of that moment is almost too heavy for the sleepy tide to carry. Before White departs, the colonists agree on a signal. If they leave Roanoke, Tunity, they will carve the name of their destination into a tree or post. If they leave under distress, they will add a cross above it. This practical arrangement will later become one of the most famous clues in American colonial history. Tunity, though at the moment it is just sensible planning. A forwarding address, basically, but with more bark and fewer reliable mail carriers. You can almost admire the simplicity. Carve where you go, add a cross if things are terrible. Very Teddy. Tunity, very doomed to be interpreted by centuries of people with flashlights and podcasts. Historians still argue whether White's departure was the colony's only realistic hope, or the final structural weakness that made disappearance possible. Tunity. Some see him as a responsible governor doing what survival required. Others see the entire situation as evidence of catastrophic planning, a civilian colony placed in danger, undersupplied, dependent on rescue, and then left for years. Tunity. You stand between those views and feel the cruel balance. White may have done the necessary thing. Necessary things can still break your heart and then break the people waiting behind you. The ships prepare. Ropes tighten. Tunity. Sailcloth lifts and snaps, barrels roll. Men shout over wind and water. The colony gathers to watch, because departures are performances even when nobody wants tickets. White carries letters, requests, explanations. Tunity, and the invisible burden of every face staring after him. He must persuade England that Roanoke is worth saving quickly. He must cross the sea safely. He must return before hunger, fear, weather, Tunity, or violence rearranges the settlement beyond recognition. No pressure, Governor. Just carry an entire colony in your paperwork. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts in here from later imagination. Tunity. Some legends suggest White left behind secret codes, or that the agreed carving system hid a deeper plan, as if the colonists were already preparing an elaborate mystery for future historians. The simpler truth is probably more human and more frightening. They needed a way to say where they had gone. They expected White to come back soon enough for the message to matter. Tunity. History does not need secret codes when ordinary hope is already tragic enough. You feel the moment the ship pulls away, the shore widens, the people shrink, the settlement becomes a cluster of pale shapes and smoke behind the trees. Tunity, White remains on deck, looking back, and you look with him. The island does not wave. It holds its silence. Pine tops or marsh grass bends. The water between ship and shore becomes a widening sentence with no punctuation. As Roanoke recedes, Tunity, the Atlantic, takes command of the story. The crossing east is not instant. It is weeks of cramped quarters, weather, fear, salt, stiff clothing, and food that could make even a starving colonist reconsider enthusiasm. White carries urgency, Tunity, but urgency does not make ships faster in a 16th century wind. The sea has never cared about deadlines. It is basically the original slow loading screen, except you can drown in it. Behind him, the colony enters, waiting. You stay with that waiting for a moment before following the ship fully away. The settlers count days by meals, by repairs, by weather, by rumors, by small improvements that may or may not matter. Perhaps they speak of White's return as certain. Tunity, perhaps they calculate seasons. Perhaps they keep contact with Croatan allies. Perhaps they argue quietly about whether they should move. Every ordinary choice now leans toward a future nobody can see. And White carried eastward. Tunity becomes a man divided by water. England lies ahead with its court politics, war fears, money problems, and competing priorities. Roanoke lies behind with his family and a promise carved only in intention, not yet in wood. Tunity. You feel the locked door feeling settle over the ocean, though he does not know it yet. He thinks he is going to fetch help. He thinks the door can be opened again soon. The wind fills the sails, the island sinks below the horizon. Tunity and the people of Roanoke are left in the green hush of the coast, waiting for a rescue that time has already begun to steal. Section 8. You follow White eastward until Roanoke becomes less a place behind him than a pressure under his ribs. The island is gone from sight, but not from thought. It travels with him in the damp folds of his clothing, Tunity, in the salt crust on his hands, and the imagined cry of his granddaughter, in every creak of the ship that sounds like time being wasted. He has one job now: reach England, gather help, return quickly. A clean 3-step plan, which is adorable, Tunity, because history has already pulled up a chair and is preparing to ruin it with paperwork. England receives him into a world that is not calm. The late 1580s are tense, expensive, and loud with rumors of Spanish invasion. Tunity, that is the mainstream historical fact pressing hardest against Roanoke's fate. The Spanish Armada crisis of 1588 disrupts English shipping and makes it extremely difficult for White to secure vessels for a rescue voyage. Tunity, ships are needed for defense. Sailors are needed for war. Supplies are needed for national survival. A small colony across the ocean, even one containing White's family, becomes one urgent matter among many larger, shinier emergencies. Tunity, you step into English harbors and feel the difference immediately. There is no sleepy marsh whisper here. There is hammering, shouting, smoke from pitch, the slap of water against hulls, the stink of fish and tar. Tunity, the nervous energy of a kingdom bracing for attack. Men repair ships, officials count provisions, captains argue. Tunity, merchants calculate risk with the tender compassion of people who would sell you an umbrella during a flood and charge extra for clouds. White's pleas enter this machinery, and the machinery does not stop for him. He goes to rally to backers, Tunity, to anyone who might help. He explains the colony's need. He speaks of settlers left behind, families, danger, supplies, timing. But the response is tangled. Raleigh's resources are limited. Queen and country are focused on Spain. Tunity. Private vessels are difficult to obtain because the government restricts ships from leaving when they may be needed against the Armada. Even when permission is possible, investors and captains often prefer voyages that promise profit, prizes, Tunity, or Spanish loot. Rescuing hungry colonists is noble, yes, but noble does not glitter like captured silver. Very inconvenient design flaw. White's urgency meets the great enemy of all human plans: other people's priorities. Tunity, you can feel him pushing against delays that are individually explainable and collectively devastating. A ship unavailable here, a license problem there. A captain tempted by privateering, a storm season, a funding shortage. Tunity, the colony waits across the sea while every excuse in England puts on boots and marches in formation. Bureaucracy may not carry a sword, but it can still quietly stab hope in the ankle. Tunity. Historians still argue whether the delay was unavoidable because of the Armada crisis or whether Raleigh investors and English authorities failed the colony through neglect and divided motives. Tunity, it is easy to judge from a warm room centuries later, especially with snacks, electricity, and maps that do not actively try to kill you. Yet the uncomfortable truth remains: Tunity. England could mobilize ships for war and profit more readily than for settlement rescue. Roanoke's people were not forgotten in a single dramatic betrayal. They were slowly pushed to the edge by competing needs, shrinking attention, Tunity, and the brutal arithmetic of empire. White does make an attempt in 1588. 2 small vessels are arranged for a relief voyage, but the mission becomes entangled with privateering. Instead of moving directly and safely toward Roanoke, Tunity, the ships chase prizes and opportunity. 1 vessel is damaged in a fight with a French ship and forced back. The rescue collapses before it even reaches the colony. Tunity. This is the sort of moment where you stare at the ocean and wonder whether everyone involved has mistaken saving families for side quest optional. The Atlantic naturally offers no comment because it is busy being enormous. Tunity. You imagine Roanoke during this same time, though the documents cannot let you see it clearly. The colonists do not know about the Armada in detail. They do not know which harbor White reaches, which official delays him, Tunity, which captain changes plans. They only know the rescue has not come. Days become weeks, weeks become seasons, supplies shrink or are replaced by whatever they can gather, grow, trade for, or receive through alliance. Tunity. Every sunrise requires practical decisions. Stay. Move. Seek shelter with Crawdon allies, break into smaller groups. Wait one more week. Waiting is not passive when hunger is involved. Waiting becomes labor with no visible product. Tunity. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts through later tales of these lost years. Some storytellers imagine the colonists watching strange lights, omens, or ghostly signs in the woods while England battles Spain far away. Tunity. There is no solid evidence for spectral warnings, of course, though you can understand the temptation. When records go silent, imagination rushes in like a raccoon finding an unlocked pantry. Tunity. The real omens were probably more ordinary and more frightening. Empty barrels, tense meetings, storms, sickness, arguments, and the steady absence of sails on the horizon. In England, the Armada comes and goes in 1588. Tunity defeated by English resistance, Spanish misfortune, weather, and the violent confusion of naval war. The country celebrates survival, but celebration does not immediately free White's path. War leaves aftershocks, ships need repair. Tunity. Money runs thin, priorities remain scattered, Raleigh's colonial project loses momentum. People who once spoke beautifully of Virginia now have newer concerns, fresher fears, better investments, and possibly dinner plans. Empire, like memory, Tunity, can be terribly selective. You feel White aging inside the delay. Not necessarily in years, though years are passing, but in the way hope must keep rebuilding itself after each failure. He cannot simply swim back, he cannot command the state. He cannot conjure ships from mist. He is caught between love and logistics is winning in the most boring way possible. There is no villain standing before him with a black cape and a dramatic laugh. There are forms, storms, wars. Tunity cost captains permissions and missed chances. Honestly, a cape would be easier to fight. Across the ocean, the colony becomes a silence England keeps postponing. The people of Roanoke are still alive in White's mind because they must be. Tunity. Eleanor is alive, Virginia is growing. The settlers are managing somehow. Crawdon friendship may be holding. The signal system remains ready, he has to believe this. Tunity, because the alternative would hollow him out before he ever reaches the shore again. And so the rescue stretches from promise into waiting, from waiting into dread. Tunity. The Spanish threat that once seemed like England's central nightmare becomes part of Roanoke's smaller, colder nightmare. A colony can disappear not only through violence or hunger, but through distance, distraction, and the slow failure of return. You stand with White in that long delay, hearing ship bells, gulls' shouted orders, and the invisible ticking of lives far beyond the western horizon, where the island waits without telling anyone what has happened. The waiting finally cracks open in 1590, but not with relief. It opens with waves, darkness, and the kind of weather that makes every sailor suddenly remember religion. Tunity. You stand with John White as the coast of Virginia rises again from the Atlantic, low and shadowed, more memory than landscape at first. 3 years have passed since he left Roanoke. 3 years of war, delay, failed voyages, bad luck, Tunity, worse priorities, and the slow grinding sound of a promise being dragged over stone. The ship that brings him back is not the triumphant rescue vessel of anyone's dreams. It is part of a privateering expedition, because apparently even a desperate family rescue needs to be bundled with, maybe steal from the Spanish to attract proper interest. The voyage reaches the Outer Banks in August 1590. Tunity, and that is the mainstream historical fact now tightening around you. John White finally returns to Roanoke after being delayed since 1587, only to find the settlement abandoned and the colonists gone. The timing is almost unbearably cruel. Tunity. White returns around the 3rd birthday of Virginia Dare, the granddaughter he last saw as a newborn. You feel that date hovering near him like a small candle in a storm. In another version of the world, Tunity steps ashore to find a little girl running awkwardly through sand, perhaps shy of the grandfather she does not remember. In this world, the shore gives him wind, rain, and silence. History is not subtle here. Tunity. It simply takes the softest possibility and leaves the door open to an empty room. The landing is difficult. The coast is dangerous, full of shifting bars and treacherous surf. Boats struggle. Men are lost during the attempt to reach the island. Tunity. A grim reminder that Roanoke does not even allow investigation without charging a fee. The sea keeps behaving like a bouncer at the worst nightclub in the 16th century. No easy entry, no explanation, and absolutely no refund. Still, Tunity. White presses on, pulled by fear and hope so tangled they might as well be the same rope. You move inland with him toward the old settlement. The path feels familiar and wrong. Trees crowd close. The air is thick with summer heat, damp leaves, and the sour, sweet smell of marshland. Insects whine near your ears with the confidence of creatures who have inherited the place. The fort area should be noisy. It should carry the rough music of survival axis, voices, children, cooking, Tunity. Quarrels, someone complaining that the bread is terrible as if that is the colony's top issue. Instead, there is only the layered hush of an island that has been keeping a secret too long. At first, the absence almost looks orderly. Tunity, that may be the most unsettling part. This is not a scene of obvious chaos. You do not step into a battlefield frozen in place. You do not find the settlement smashed in a way that answers everything. You find emptiness with structure still clinging to it. Houses or dwellings have been taken down or altered. A defensive palisade stands. The place seems changed by decision, not simply erased by sudden terror. Tunity. Roanoke has not left a dramatic note saying, Everything went terribly, please see attached report. Very inconsiderate, honestly, considering how many documentaries this would have saved. Then White sees the carving. On a post, Tunity, the letters read Ciaran. The word sits there, blunt and patient, carved into wood, not whispered by ghosts, not glowing under moonlight, not delivered by a raven with excellent timing. Just letters, a place name, a possible destination. Tunity, a clue so clear that later centuries will somehow turn it into a fog machine. Croatoan points toward the island and people associated with Manteo, the native ally whose community had been friendlier to the English. Before White left, Tunity, the colonists had agreed that if they moved, they would carve where they had gone. This is exactly the kind of sign he had asked for, and yet certainty does not arrive. You stand beside White as he studies the message. Tunity, the carved word should comfort him. It might mean they relocated to Croatoan for safety, food alliance, and survival. Tunity. It might mean Eleanor and Virginia are alive among people who can actually manage the coast better than a stranded English settlement. It might mean the plan worked, just not in the tidy English way anyone expected. Tunity, but the 3-year delay has made even good news feel suspicious. Hope comes back thin, wearing a coat full of holes. Tunity, historians still argue whether the Ciardo carving should be read as a straightforward relocation notice or as a clue complicated by later fear, failed follow-up, and missing context. On one hand, the colonists did what they had promised. They left a name. On the other hand, White cannot immediately confirm it. Weather damaged anchorage, reluctant crews, and the expedition's priorities prevent a proper journey to Croatoan Island. The clue points south, Tunity, but the rescue does not follow far enough. It is like receiving the world's most important text message and then losing signal forever. Very on brand for Roanoke. White also notices what is not there, the agreed sign of distress, a cross. Tunity is not carved with the message. That absence matters, though you hold most of its implications for the next slow turn of the story. For now, it means White has reason to believe the colonists did not leave in immediate panic. Reason, however, Tunity, is not the same thing as peace. A missing cross cannot hug a grandfather. A carved word cannot tell him whether his daughter smiled that morning, whether Virginia learned to speak, whether the colony left together or in pieces. A quirky fringe tidbit begins almost here at the birth of the mystery itself. Later imaginations will treat Ciardo as a curse word, a supernatural omen, or a secret code, though in the historical setting it most plainly names a people and place. Tunity, the transformation is revealing. People often prefer a spooky riddle to a practical clue because spooky riddles ask less of us. A practical clue says follow the human relationships, the food networks, the alliances, the survival decisions. Tunity. A spooky clue says buy a candle and look worried. Much easier lighting. The settlement's silence settles into White. You feel him trying to choose interpretation because interpretation is all he has left. The houses do not answer. Tunity, the pines do not answer. The carved letters hold their shape in the humid air. Somewhere beyond the water lies Croatoan, possible refuge, possible answer, possible final thread connecting England's lost families to a living native world. Tunity. But the sea and the season are against him again, those two unpaid villains who keep arriving right on schedule. So the return becomes another failure of return. White reaches the place but not the people. He finds the message but not the meaning. Tunity, he comes close enough to touch the edge of the mystery, then is pulled away before he can open it. You stand in the abandoned settlement as evening lowers over Roanoke, watching shadows fill the spaces where families once moved, while the word Ciarotone waits in the wood like a door no one has managed to walk through. You stay with the carved word a little longer because Roanoke refuses to let anyone leave quickly, even in memory. Ciarotone waits in the wood, plain enough to read and stubborn enough to outlive almost every person who saw it. Around it, Tunity, the settlement holds its breath. The evening air presses warm against your skin. Pine needles shift overhead. Somewhere in the marsh, water moves with a soft, secretive sound. Tunity, as if the island has decided to speak only in subtitles no one can translate. White does not find the cross. That absence matters more than almost any shadow in the trees. Before he left in 1587, Tunity, the colonists had agreed that if they moved under distress, they would carve a cross above the destination name. In 1590, he finds Ciarotone carved, but no cross marking emergency. Tunity. That is the mainstream historical fact you carry through this uneasy clearing. The agreed distress signal is missing. So, at least according to the plan, the colonists did not leave in a sudden forced panic. They left, or seemed to leave, Tunity, with enough order to carve a message and without adding the sign that would have warned White of immediate danger. You let that sit for a moment. No cross, no obvious battlefield, no bodies laid out for explanation. Tunity, no dramatic villain stepping from behind a tree to announce, yes, it was I, which is frankly poor narrative service from history. Instead, you get a clue that almost makes sense, and that is somehow worse. A nonsense clue can be dismissed. Tunity, a sensible clue demands that you think carefully, and careful thinking is much harder at dusk with mosquitoes treating your face like an open buffet. White searches further. Tunity, he finds the letters CRO carved into a tree or post near the entrance area, another shortened hint pointing toward the same destination. CRO Sarome. The settlement seems to repeat itself, as if worried the rescue party might miss the message. Tunity. You can almost hear the colonists before they left carve it here too, make it clear, make sure he knows. There is something painfully practical about that. Not mystical, not cursed, just people trying to be found. Tunity. The physical sight gives more clues, but none of them speak loudly enough. The houses have been taken down, not simply burned. The settlement has been enclosed with a palisade, suggesting some attempted defense or organization after White's departure. This feels less like instant massacre and more like a community adapting, fortifying, preparing, perhaps deciding to relocate. Wood does not dismantle itself neatly. Opportunity, someone had time. Someone made choices. Someone packed what could be carried and left what could not. And then there are White's belongings. He had buried chests before leaving containing books, maps, pictures, and other personal goods. Opportunity. When he returns, he finds that the chests have been dug up and spoiled, their contents scattered or ruined by weather. Imagine that small private heartbreak. Not only is his family gone, but the things he left behind for safekeeping are damaged too. His maps, his drawings, his books, little anchors of identity in a frightening place, are wrecked. Even the storage plan has failed. Roanoke does not just misplace colonies, opportunity, it also has terrible archive management. You bend near the disturbed earth and picture the chests being opened. Was it native people searching the abandoned site? Colonists retrieving what they needed before moving? Opportunity, weather and time finishing what human hands began. The scene refuses to tell you. A soggy book can accuse nobody. A spoiled map can only curl into itself. Yet the ruined chests matter because they show that the site was visited, disturbed, opportunity, and altered after White left. The settlement was not sealed in a single frozen moment. It changed. People came and went, meaning moved around. Opportunity. Historians still argue whether the dismantled houses and missing distress cross prove an organized relocation, or whether they only show that the colonists had time to leave before some later hardship overtook them. Opportunity. That debate is the hinge of Roanoke. If you read the clues optimistically, the colonists moved to Croatoan, likely seeking food and protection among allies. If you read them darkly, the message marks only the first step in a longer collapse. Opportunity. Both readings can stand in the same clearing, staring at the same carved letters, refusing to blink. You notice how easily mystery grows where follow-up fails. If White had been able to sail to Croatoan Island immediately, speak with Mantio's people, search carefully, and record what he found, the story might have become a difficult but ordinary tale of relocation and survival. Instead, storms, dangerous shoals, reluctant crews, opportunity, and the privateering mission's priorities pull the expedition away. The clue is left unfollowed. It is like finding a note that says, "We went next door," and then deciding next door is inconvenient because the driveway looks wet. Not ideal detective work, John, though to be fair, the driveway is an angry ocean. A quirky fringe tidbit from much later adds another layer of oddness. In the 20th century, a series of so-called Dare stones appeared, claiming to contain carved messages from Eleanor Dare about the colony's fate. Most were exposed or dismissed as forgeries. Opportunity. Though one early stone still gets occasional discussion from people who enjoy historical mysteries with a side of suspicious rock. The appeal is obvious. A message from Eleanor would feel like a hand reaching out of the fog. Opportunity. But Roanoke's real surviving message is still the older, simpler one, Croatoan, carved into wood, inconveniently human and incomplete. You move through the abandoned settlement as night thickens. The clues are not theatrical, opportunity, but they are intimate. A missing cross, a repeated word, a fortified enclosure, houses taken down, chests disturbed, books ruined. These are not the signs of people evaporating. They are the signs of people making decisions under pressure. Opportunity, using the tools, alliances, and options available to them. Maybe they were afraid, maybe they were practical. Most likely they were both, because survival rarely feels clean while you are doing it. The island, meanwhile, keeps its maddening calm. Opportunity, the pines whisper above you. The palisade posts darken in the fading light. You imagine White touching the carved letters, trying to pull certainty from rough wood. No cross. That should be comfort. Ciardome. That should be direction. Opportunity. But without the people themselves, every clue becomes a question wearing a very small hat. And so Roanoke's mystery deepens not because there are no signs, but because the signs almost answer, then stop just before the word you need most. You follow the clue south in your mind because White's ship does not manage to do what the story desperately needs it to do. The carved word points toward Croatoan, and Croatoan is not a ghost, not a spell, opportunity, not a spooky syllable invented for late-night television. It is a real place, tied to real people, south of Roanoke, associated with the island now commonly linked to Hatteras. The wind shifts, and you imagine leaving the empty settlement behind. Opportunity, crossing water and marsh, moving toward the one answer the wood seemed willing to give. The mainstream historical fact here is simple and stubborn. Croatoan was the name of a native group in their island, opportunity, and the English had already maintained friendlier relations with them through Mantio. That matters because it turns the famous carving from a horror movie prop into a practical relocation notice. If the colonists were hungry, frightened, opportunity, and waiting too long for English rescue, going toward Croatoan would make sense. It offered alliance, local knowledge, food networks, and human connection. Not guaranteed safety, no. But in Roanoke terms, opportunity, not guaranteed doom, is practically luxury housing. You step onto imagined Croatoan ground and feel how different survival might look here. The English houses of Roanoke were fragile attempts to remake home. Among Croatoan people, opportunity, the land is not an unsolved puzzle. It is lived knowledge, fishing seasons, shellfish beds, paths, crops, storms, medicines, kinship obligations, warnings carried by memory instead of paper. If the colonists came here, opportunity, they would not simply be rescued. In the heroic English sense, they would have to be absorbed, hosted, negotiated with, watched, perhaps married in, perhaps divided among families or communities. Opportunity, survival might require becoming less visibly English. And there, quietly, the mystery begins to look less like disappearance and more like transformation. That possibility unsettles later colonial imagination. Vanishing into the woods sounds tragic or supernatural. Joining native communities sounds politically uncomfortable for the stories later America preferred to tell about itself. It means the lost colonists may not have died dramatically. They may have lived differently. They may have eaten different food, learned different words, raised children inside a mixed world, and slowly slipped out of English paperwork like crumbs falling behind a table. History hates when people survive in ways that do not flatter the archive. The archive sits there saying, please remain legible, and human life replies, no thanks, I'm busy not starving. You picture Eleanor Dare if she lived? Not as a marble statue of sorrow, not as a ghostly mother in a white dress, but as a practical woman making decisions with a child to protect. If Croton allies offered food and shelter, would she cling to English separation until it killed them? Or would she adapt? Would Ananias dare work, trade, learn, bargain? Would Virginia grow up hearing English lullabies and Algonquian words in the same air? The thought is tender and strange, and much more believable than everyone politely waiting in place for 3 years like furniture with hats. Historians still argue whether the Roanoke colonists joined the Croatoan people, moved there temporarily before scattering, or only intended to go there before events overtook them. The debate continues because the evidence is suggestive rather than final. The carving points strongly toward Croatoan. Later archaeological finds on Hatteras Island include European materials from the Right Broad period, though interpreting them is difficult because trade goods could move through many hands. A shard, a ring, a tool fragment, a gun part, each object whispers, but none stands up and gives a sworn statement. Very rude of artifacts, honestly. Still, the Croatoan theory has a calm logic that many wilder explanations lack. The colonists had a known ally there. They left the name without a distress cross. Their houses appear to have been dismantled, not suddenly destroyed. The return was delayed long enough that staying on Roanoke may have become impossible. Food shortages, hostile relations with some neighboring groups, storms, and practical needs could all push them toward relocation. In survival terms, Croatoan is not a random guess. It is the nearest open door in a house filling with smoke. A quirky fringe tidbit wanders in from later folklore. Again, some old tales claimed that descendants of the lost colony could be identified by gray eyes, English surnames, or certain words preserved among native communities. These claims are often tangled with myth, racial politics, wishful thinking, and very uneven evidence. Human beings love a visible clue, especially one that lets them say, aha, the mystery is in the cheekbones, which is not a research method, despite the confidence which distant relatives at family gatherings may present it. Still, such stories show how strongly people wanted the lost colonists to have continued somewhere. You walk through the imagined settlement at Croatoan as evening comes on. Smoke rises from cooking fires, fish dry near racks, cornfields rustle, children move between adults. A stranger arriving from Roanoke would not step into emptiness but into rules. Who may stay? What do they bring? Who speaks for them? What debts follow them? How will their presence affect relations with hostile groups nearby? If the English are absorbed, they are not merely saved, they become part of local politics. Survival has a price, and the price may be identity. There is also the question of numbers. Around 100 colonists cannot simply appear and be fed forever without strain. Perhaps they split into smaller groups. Perhaps some went to Croatoan, others inland. Perhaps some died, some married in, some moved again. Some clung to English hopes longer than others. The neat version, everyone goes to one island and lives happily ever after under a very cooperative sunset, is probably too tidy. Roanoke rarely rewards tidy thinking. It prefers handing you a knot and then hiding the loose end under 3 centuries of weather. You sit with that possibility as the marsh darkens. The mystery softens not because it is solved, but because it becomes more human. Maybe the people of Roanoke did not vanish like mist. Maybe they walked toward help. Maybe the word in the tree was not a scream, but a note: we have gone where survival is possible. The tragedy, then, belongs partly to England's failure to follow record and understand. A living community may have stood where later storytellers imagined only ghosts. And somewhere beyond the dunes, in the warm breath of Croatoan night, the lost colony may have begun the quiet work of becoming found by someone else. Possibility behind without fully leaving it, because Roanoke's mystery does not move in a straight line. It spreads like smoke through trees, thinning here, thickening there, catching in later stories. Official reports, village memories, and the nervous imagination of English colonists who arrive after the trail has already gone cold. If some of White's people found refuge with Croatoan allies, that may not have been the end of the movement. Survival is rarely a single graceful relocation. It is more often a series of tired decisions made while hungry, watched by weather and judged later by people sitting comfortably with snacks, so you move inland. The coast falls behind you in layers of marsh, sound, pine, and shifting sand. Ahead, the rivers pull you toward the mainland, into a world of villages, fields, forest paths, trade routes, rival powers. Tune in stories carried by mouth instead of paper. The English archive grows thinner here, but not silent. Decades after White's failed return, later Jamestown colonists and officials hear rumors that some Roanoke survivors may have lived among native peoples farther inland. That is the mainstream historical fact guiding this section. Early 17th century English sources, Tunity especially around Jamestown, record reports and second-hand claims about possible survivors from the lost colony. You walk through those reports carefully because they are slippery. A rumor is not proof. Tunity, a rumor is a footprint in wet ground after 3 other people have stepped on it. Still, footprints matter. In the early 1600s, English leaders in Virginia hear stories of people with European clothing, tools, Tunity, or features living among native groups. Some accounts suggest survivors may have been held, protected, absorbed, or killed. The names of groups and places shift through English spellings, misunderstandings, and political fears. Tunity, every report arrives already wearing someone else's interpretation, like an oversized coat. One of the most haunting threads connects to the Jamestown years after 1607, when the English are again trying to survive in Virginia. Tunity, again needing native food, again misunderstanding local politics with almost athletic consistency. You remember the earlier outpost and its talent for turning hunger into diplomacy's evil twin. Jamestown manages to repeat several bad habits, because apparently colonial learning curves can be shaped like a circle. English officials ask about Roanoke. They want to know whether any of the old colonists remain. The possibility matters not only emotionally, but politically. Tunity, survivors could provide knowledge, legitimacy, perhaps even warning. Then comes the shadow of Powhatan, the powerful paramount chief whose influence stretches across much of Tidewater, Virginia. Tunity, some English reports claim that Powhatan told them he had destroyed people from Roanoke, or that remnants had lived among groups under his control. These claims are difficult, chilling, and tangled in translation, diplomacy, intimidation, Tunity, and English anxiety. Did Powhatan speak literally, strategically? Did the English understand him? Did they record what they feared hearing? The documents give you a candle, then immediately blow it sideways. Tunity. Historians still argue whether the Powhatan-related reports describe the actual fate of some Roanoke colonists, a political story meant to impress or frighten Jamestown, or English misinterpretation of events involving different people altogether. Tunity. That debate remains open because the evidence is late, indirect, and filtered through tense colonial relationships. Powhatan had reasons to manage English perceptions. English meters had reasons to hear Roanoke everywhere. Tunity, like people who lose their keys and begin accusing every cushion in the house, you pass through a landscape where scattering makes sense. If the colonists left Roanoke and moved first toward Croatoan, Tunisa may later have moved inland through alliances, marriages, trade, captivity, conflict, or simple necessity. A group of 100 people is hard to feed in one place during stress. Smaller groups can disappear into kin networks more easily. Tunity, children adapt faster than adults, skills are traded, names change, clothing wears out, English metal tools remain useful long after English identity becomes less visible. Tunity, a person can survive so completely that the people searching for them no longer recognize the shape of that survival. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this inland trail through later centuries. Tunity, some stories connect the Roanoke survivors to the Lumbee people of North Carolina, pointing to surnames, oral traditions, and reports of mixed ancestry. This idea has passionate supporters and cautious skeptics, Tunity, and it sits in the complicated borderland between community memory, identity, colonial records, and wishful historical detective work. It is not something you can solve by squinting at an old surname and saying, Tunity, case closed, though many people have tried with the confidence of someone assembling furniture without reading the instructions. Still, the persistence of such traditions tells you something important, Tunity. The Roanoke story did not remain only on the island. It traveled into families, regional lore, local identity, and arguments over belonging. Some people wanted descent from the lost colonists to prove English continuity. Tunity, others carried stories of mixture and survival that did not fit clean racial categories later societies tried to impose. The vanished colony became a mirror, and everyone leaned over it hoping to see the reflection they preferred. History, Tunity, meanwhile, stood behind them whispering, "Please stop using me as a costume rack." You hear other whispers too, reports of light-haired children, people who could speak or understand some English, crosses kept as objects, European-style houses, iron tools, and strange customs. Some details may preserve real encounters, others may grow from trade goods, captives from other events, misremembered stories. Tunity, or the English tendency to mistake anything familiar for evidence of themselves. A metal pot in a native village does not automatically mean Aunt Eleanor is making stew nearby. Trade existed, objects travel. Tunity, humans are not the only things that migrate, yet you cannot dismiss everything. The lack of a neat English rescue does not mean every colonist died quickly. Tunity, the coast and mainland were connected by native movement long before English maps behaved as if places sat separately in little labeled boxes. People could move through alliance networks, they could be adopted, enslaved, married, protected, Tunity, or relocated. Their descendants might remember something or nothing, or remember through stories that later outsiders distort. Survival leaves uneven traces, sometimes it leaves a bead, sometimes a word, sometimes only a family saying, "We were told this came from long ago." The deeper you move inland, the less Roanoke feels like a locked room mystery, and the more it becomes a story of absorption, conflict, and colonial blindness. The English kept looking for Englishness. Tunity, houses, names, crosses, letters, people ready to step forward and explain themselves in familiar terms. But if the colonists survived by entering native worlds, then the signs would not stay English for long. They would become something else, Tunity, something living, blended, practical, and hard for later officials to file correctly. Night gathers under the mainland trees. The coast is now only a damp memory behind you, the carved word only one mark at the beginning of a longer trail. Opportunity around you, rumors move like fireflies, brief, bright, impossible to hold. Some may be false, some may be fragments of truth, some may be truth changed by fear. You keep walking anyway. Opportunity, because the people of Roanoke may not have vanished in one direction. They may have scattered like sparks from a low fire, fading from English sight, while still warming other hands in the dark. You kneel now where the sand keeps pretending it has no memory. The Outer Banks do not preserve the past like a museum with polite lighting and labeled glass cases. They grind it, soak it, scatter it, bury it, opportunity, and sometimes toss it back up after a storm like a cat bringing you something unpleasant and looking proud. Roanoke's archaeology is not a treasure chest waiting under one dramatic X. It is a slow conversation with broken things. Opportunity, the mainstream historical fact here is that modern researchers have searched both Roanoke Island and Hatteras Island for evidence connected to the 1587 colony, finding European materials that may relate to English presence, trade, or later contact. Opportunity, that sounds simple until you actually try to interpret it. A piece of pottery does not wear a tiny name tag saying, "Hello, I belong to Eleanor Dare." A copper object does not raise its hand and explain whether it arrived with colonists, opportunity through native trade from earlier expeditions or from later Europeans. Archaeology gives clues, not courtroom confessions. Very inconsiderate, but at least it keeps conferences lively. Opportunity, you brush soil from a small fragment and feel how fragile certainty becomes. Ceramic sherds, metal scraps, glass beads, tool pieces, food remains, postal stains in the earth. Each one matters, but only in context. Where was it found? How deep? Opportunity, with what other objects? Is the layer disturbed? Could storms have moved it? Could later settlers have dropped it? Could collectors have interfered before professionals arrived? The past is not just buried, it is constantly being edited by weather, opportunity, animals, roots, erosion, construction, tourism, and the occasional human who thinks souvenir is a research method. Please do not be that person. History already has enough problems. On Roanoke Island, 2D archaeologists have investigated areas associated with English activity, including the site traditionally linked to Fort Raleigh. The exact layout and remains of the 16th century settlement have been difficult to pin down, opportunity, partly because the environment has changed and partly because later activity disturbed the ground. You stand where a fort may have stood, where houses may have been built, where colonists may have argued over food, repairs, opportunity, and whether anyone remembered to pack more nails. The island offers hints, then folds its arms. On Hatteras Island, the Croatoan impossibility becomes more physical. Excavations have uncovered European artifacts from the broader contact period, opportunity, including items that supporters connect to the lost colonist, pieces of weaponry, pottery, personal objects, and trade goods. Some finds are intriguing because they appear in native contexts, opportunity, suggesting interaction rather than a purely English settlement. That fits the survival through alliance theory beautifully, almost too beautifully, which is when historians begin clearing their throats and asking annoying but necessary questions. Opportunity. Historians still argue whether these artifacts prove that Roanoke colonists joined the Croatoan people, or whether they reflect trade, earlier English visits, shipwreck salvage, or later European contact. The debate is not just stubbornness. Opportunity, it is method. Evidence has to carry weight without being forced to hold up an entire legend. A single object can support a possibility, it rarely solves a disappearance. If one bead could close a case, opportunity, archaeology would be much shorter and far less funded. Then there is the map. You lean over John White's famous map of the region, opportunity, where modern examination revealed hidden patches and markings that some researchers believe may point to inland locations of interest. One patched area, sometimes discussed as a possible fort symbol, opportunity, has fueled speculation that the colonists may have planned or attempted a move inland. This is one of those moments where the past seems to wink, and everyone in the room immediately disagrees about what the wink means. Opportunity, was it a planned settlement site, a correction, a military note, a cartographic accident wearing a dramatic hat? The map does not explain itself, because apparently even paper enjoys suspense. A quirky fringe tidbit grows from this map mystery. Opportunity, some enthusiasts have treated the hidden marking like a secret treasure clue, almost a Renaissance version of zoom and enhance, as if John White were leaving a puzzle box for future cable television. Opportunity, the serious research is more careful than that, but the excitement is understandable. A concealed symbol feels intimate. It suggests that even the documents have private thoughts. Still, a hidden mark is not a vanished colony waving from the trees. Opportunity, it is a lead, and leads must walk on evidence, not vibes. You sift deeper into the problem of identity. Suppose the colonists did join Croatoan or other native communities. What would archaeology look like after 1 year, 5 years? 20. Opportunity. English clothing would wear out, tools would be reused, traded, reshaped, metal would be valuable, not sentimental. A broken pot might be kept because it is useful, not because anyone is preserving a national mystery. Opportunity, children born or raised in native households might leave no obviously English trace at all. Survival can erase the very signs later searchers want most. That is the quiet twist under your fingertips. If the Roanoke people survived, well, archaeology may become harder, not easier. A group clinging separately to English habits might leave a clear English footprint. A group adapting successfully might blend into native material life, leaving only mixed objects and ambiguous traces. The more human the answer becomes, the less dramatic the evidence may look. History has a cruel sense of humor. It hides people best when they are busy living. You imagine a small European object passed from hand to hand on Hatteras, useful. Tunity, strange, maybe once part of a colonist kit, maybe traded from sailors, maybe salvaged from somewhere else entirely. A child touches it, an elder weighs it, someone cuts, bends, repairs, repurposes. The object's original story thins. Tunity, while its new story thickens. Centuries later, an archaeologist lifts it from the ground and everyone asks it to choose one identity. But objects, like people, can belong to more than one world. The sand cools as evening comes. The excavation squares turn shadowed and careful. Trowels rest. Screens stand quiet. Around you, the land seems almost amused by modern certainty. It has watched colonists panic, native communities adapt, storms redraw shorelines, legends bloom. Tunity, tourists arrive, and researchers argue politely over tiny fragments. Somewhere under all this are answers, perhaps not one answer, but many small ones: a move south, a split inland, marriages, deaths, adoptions, trade, loss, survival. You rise with dust on your hands and no final verdict, only a sharper respect for broken evidence. Roanoke's archaeology does not shout, but it does murmur. It tells you the vanished people belong to a real landscape, not just a mystery. Tunity, they left traces in wood, soil maps, objects, and in the stubborn possibility that disappearance may be what survival looks like when the archive stops watching. The evidence stays under your fingernails as you step out of the excavation light and into the louder afterlife of Roanoke. The island Hatteras, the inland rumors, the pottery shards, the hidden marks on old maps. All of them remain quiet, be cautious and incomplete. But the myth does not believe in caution. The myth throws open the door, lights a lantern under its chin, and whispers, what if everyone vanished into thin air? Very tasteful, very marketable, not especially helpful. But apparently that has never stopped a mystery from getting excellent publicity. You feel the story change shape over the centuries. In its own time, Roanoke is a failed colonial project, a human emergency wrapped in bad planning, tunity, damaged diplomacy, war delays, and brutal distance. Later it becomes something cleaner and stranger, the Lost Colony, capital letters included, as if topography might make uncertainty more dramatic. Tunity. The mainstream historical fact here is that Roanoke becomes known as England's first attempted permanent colony in North America and one of the earliest enduring mysteries in what later becomes the United States. Tunity, that fame grows because the evidence stops just early enough to let imagination rent the entire building. You walk through later America and the empty settlement begins to fill with performances. Schoolbooks tell the story with a shiver. Tunity, local commemorations turn it into heritage. Outdoor dramas bring the vanished settlers back under stage lights, where actors can conveniently appear every night, unlike the original colonists, who were much less cooperative with scheduling. Tunity. Tourists arrive wanting the carved word, the vanished family's Virginia dare, the whisper of trees. They want a mystery that feels sad, spooky, and safe enough to enjoy after lunch. That is one of Roanoke's strangest transformations. Tunity, the real story is messy: native politics, English aggression, supply failure, environmental stress, European war, archival silence. The popular story trims all that into one clean question: where did they go? It is powerful, Tunity, but it can flatten the people involved. The colonists become ghosts before they remain settlers, parents, children, workers, negotiators, survivors. Native communities become scenery or suspects instead of active political worlds. Tunity, and John White becomes the tragic grandfather, forever arriving too late, which is emotionally effective, yes, but history is not supposed to be only a sad violin with facts attached. Tunity historians still argue whether the popular legend of Roanoke preserves public interest or distorts the past by turning a likely story of relocation, assimilation, conflict, and survival into a supernatural disappearance. Tunity, that debate matters because myths decide where attention goes. If people ask only, was it ghosts, they may stop asking what happened between English settlers and native communities. If people chase curses, they may miss corn, trade, fear, tunity, marriage, and weather. Ghosts are easier than systems. Systems require homework, and nobody buys a souvenir mug that says, complex intercultural breakdown. Still, you cannot deny the myth has power. At night, tunity, the word Ciaradon does feel strange. A carved name in an empty place is the sort of image that crawls into human imagination and starts rearranging furniture. The missing cross, the ruined chest, the unfollowed clue. Tunity, the child born into silence. All of it has narrative gravity. You stand under trees and understand why people keep returning. Roanoke offers enough fact to anchor the dream and enough blank space to let the dream breathe. Tunity, a quirky fringe tidbit, rises from that blank space like swamp mist. The word Froatoan later gets pulled into supernatural fiction, conspiracy theories, and pop culture horror. Sometimes treated as a cursed term linked to disappearances far beyond the original event. There is no historical basis for magical infection by vocabulary. Tunity, which is good news for anyone who has accidentally said Froatoan while looking for a parking spot. But the transformation shows how mystery words behave once released. They stop being addresses and become spells in the public mind. Tunity, Virginia Dare, receives an even heavier mythic burden. She becomes not only the first English child born in the colony, but a symbol onto which later generations project innocence, origins, frontier loss, and sometimes uncomfortable politics. Tunity, her name appears in pageants, poems, memorials, advertising, and folklore. In one legend, she becomes the white doe, wandering through the woods until tragedy catches her again. The story is lovely in the way old legends can be lovely, but also revealing. When people do not know what happened to a child, they often turn her into something they can mourn without facing harsher possibilities. You move through Roanoke tourism now signs, reconstructed spaces, museum displays, and gift shops, historical markers, guided talks, and visitors trying to feel the past through comfortable shoes. None of this is inherently bad. Public memory needs places. Opportunity, standing where something happened, can awaken curiosity in a way no paragraph can manage. But the place must be handled carefully. Roanoke is not only a spooky brand, it is a collision point of English ambition and indigenous sovereignty. Opportunity of family hope and imperial failure of survival choices later records refuse to preserve. The internet naturally arrives with a buffet plate and no restraint. Theories multiply: massacres, secret inland forts, hidden descendants, Spanish attacks, cannibalism, rumors, alien abduction, time slips, occult symbols, government cover-ups before the government in question even exists. Some theories are serious attempts to interpret sparse evidence. Opportunity. Others are raccoons in a trench coat pretending to be scholarship. You watch them scroll by and feel that old Roanoke problem repeat. People keep mistaking incomplete evidence for permission to believe absolutely anything. Opportunity. And yet the myth refuses to die because the core image remains devastating. A grandfather returns. The houses are empty. A word is carved into wood. The people are gone from English sight. That is enough. You do not need aliens when abandonment, opportunity, distance, and failed rescue are already frightening. You do not need a curse when history itself has produced one of the loneliest scenes in early America. Opportunity. The real mystery is why later generations often prefer evaporation to the grounded possibility that they entered native worlds and became harder for English memory to claim. So you let the myth grow loud around you, Opportunity, but you do not let it drown the quieter voices. Beneath the pageant music, ghost tours, and online theories wearing oversized detective hats, the older story remains: people under pressure made choices. Native communities judged, resisted, helped, opportunity, negotiated, remembered. England failed to return in time. The archive blinked, and into that blink, centuries of imagination poured themselves until Roanoke became not just a lost colony, opportunity, but a mirror showing how badly people want mystery to feel simpler than history. The evidence stays under your fingernails as you step out of the excavation light and into the louder afterlife of Roanoke. The island Hatteras, the inland rumors, the pottery shards, the hidden marks on old maps. All of them remain quiet, cautious, and incomplete. But the myth does not believe in caution. The myth throws open the door, lights a lantern under its chin, and whispers, what if everyone vanished into thin air? Very tasteful, very marketable, not especially helpful, opportunity, but apparently that has never stopped a mystery from getting excellent publicity. You feel the story change shape over the centuries. In its own time, Roanoke is a failed colonial project, a human emergency wrapped in bad planning, opportunity, damaged diplomacy, war delays, and brutal distance. Later, it becomes something cleaner and stranger, the Lost Colony, capital letters included, as if topography might make uncertainty more dramatic. Opportunity, the mainstream historical fact here is that Roanoke becomes known as England's first attempted permanent colony in North America and one of the earliest enduring mysteries in what later becomes the United States. Opportunity. That fame grows because the evidence stops just early enough to let imagination rent the entire building. You walk through later America and the empty settlement begins to fill with performances. School books tell the story with a shiver. Opportunity, local commemorations turn it into heritage. Outdoor dramas bring the vanished settlers back under stage lights, where actors can conveniently appear every night, unlike the original colonists, who were much less cooperative with scheduling. Opportunity, tourists arrive wanting the carved word, the vanished families, Virginia Dare, the whisper of trees. They want a mystery that feels sad, spooky, and safe enough to enjoy after lunch. That is one of Roanoke's strangest transformations. Opportunity, the real story is messy: native politics, English aggression, supply failure, environmental stress, European war, archival silence. The popular story trims all that into one clean question: where did they go? It is powerful, but it can flatten the people involved. The colonists become ghosts before they remain settlers: parents, children, workers, negotiators, survivors. Native communities become scenery or suspects instead of active political worlds. Opportunity, and John White becomes the tragic grandfather, forever arriving too late, which is emotionally effective, yes, but history is not supposed to be only a sad violin with facts attached. Opportunity, historians still argue whether the popular legend of Roanoke preserves public interest or distorts the past by turning a likely story of relocation, assimilation, conflict, and survival into a supernatural disappearance. Opportunity, that debate matters because myths decide where attention goes. If people ask only, was it ghosts? They may stop asking what happened between English settlers and native communities. If people chase curses, they may miss corn, trade, fear, opportunity, marriage, and weather. Ghosts are easier than systems. Systems require homework, and nobody buys a souvenir mug that says, complex intercultural breakdown. Still, you cannot deny the myth has power. At night, opportunity, the word Ciarodon does feel strange. A carved name in an empty place is the sort of image that crawls into human imagination and starts rearranging furniture. The missing cross, the ruined chest, the unfollowed clue. Opportunity, the child born into silence, all of it has narrative gravity. You stand under trees and understand why people keep returning. Roanoke offers enough fact to anchor the dream and enough blank space to let the dream breathe. Opportunity, a quirky fringe tidbit rises from that blank space like swamp mist. The word Fruado and later gets pulled into supernatural fiction, conspiracy theories, and pop culture horror. Opportunity, sometimes treated as a cursed term linked to disappearances far beyond the original event. There is no historical basis for magical infection by vocabulary, tunity, which is good news for anyone who has accidentally said Froatoan while looking for a parking spot. But the transformation shows how mystery words behave once released. They stop being addresses and become spells in the public mind. Tunity, Virginia Dare receives an even heavier mythic burden. She becomes not only the first English child born in the colony, but a symbol onto which later generations project innocence origins, frontier loss, and sometimes uncomfortable politics. Tunity, her name appears in pageants, poems, memorials, advertising, and folklore. In one legend, she becomes the white doe, wandering through the woods until tragedy catches her again. The story is lovely in the way old legends can be lovely, Tunity, but also revealing. When people do not know what happened to a child, they often turn her into something they can mourn without facing harsher possibilities. You move through Roanoke Tourism Now signs, reconstructed spaces, museum displays, Tunity gift shops, historical markers, guided talks, and visitors trying to feel the past through comfortable shoes. None of this is inherently bad. Public memory needs places. Tunity. Standing where something happened can awaken curiosity in a way no paragraph can manage. But the place must be handled carefully. Roanoke is not only a spooky brand. It is a collision point of English ambition and indigenous sovereignty. Tunity of family hope and imperial failure, of survival choices later records refuse to preserve. The internet naturally arrives with a buffet plate and no restraint. Theories multiply, massacres, secret inland forts, hidden descendants. Tunity Spanish attacks, cannibalism, rumors, alien abduction, time slips, occult symbols, government cover-ups before the government in question even exists. Some theories are serious attempts to interpret sparse evidence. Tunity. Others are raccoons in a trench coat pretending to be scholarship. You watch them scroll by and feel that old Roanoke problem repeat. People keep mistaking incomplete evidence for permission to believe absolutely anything. Tunity. Yet the myth refuses to die because the core image remains devastating. A grandfather returns, the houses are empty. A word is carved into wood, the people are gone from English sight. That is enough. You do not need aliens when abandonment, tunity, distance, and failed rescue are already frightening. You do not need a curse when history itself has produced one of the loneliest scenes in early America. Tunity. The real mystery is why later generations often prefer evaporation to the grounded possibility that they entered native worlds and became harder for English memory to claim. So you let the myth grow loud around you, tunity, but you do not let it drown the quieter voices. Beneath the pageant music, ghost tours, and online theories wearing oversized detective hats, the older story remains. People under pressure made choices. Native communities judged, resisted, helped, tunity, negotiated, remembered. England failed to return in time. The archive blinked. And into that blink, centuries of imagination poured themselves, until Roanoke became not just a lost colony, tunity, but a mirror showing how badly people want mystery to feel simpler than history.